Welcome everyone to Current in 30, the 30-minute webinar series brought to you by the Current Consulting Group. We are thrilled to have you with us. To briefly introduce this series, each session is designed to keep you informed, efficient, and ahead of the curve. On the second and fourth Mondays of each month throughout 2026, we'll break down key things you need to know about workplace drug screening, from emerging trends and regulatory updates to best practices and practical implementation tips. If you missed our previous sessions, please visit our website, currentconsultinggroup.com, or our YouTube channel at Current Consulting Group to view those sessions. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Greta Walsh of the Current Consulting Group, and today's presentation is titled How to Test, Comparing Urine, Oral Fluid, and Hair Testing. This presentation qualifies for half of a professional development credit from SHRM and HRCI for those who attend today's presentation in its entirety. Today's presentation welcomes the founder and president of the Current Consulting Group, Bill Current. Among Bill's many accomplishments, he founded the Current Consulting Group in 1998. He is a former VP of Consulting at Employee Information Services. He is a former executive director of the American Council for Drug Education. He is the former director of the Institute for a Drug-Free Workplace. He has authored 11 books on substance abuse prevention and drug testing, including his 2026 release, What Every Employer Should Know About Marijuana. And lastly, Bill is currently a member of the Board of Directors at Endesa and Board of Trustees at the Endesa Foundation. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to our presenter, Bill Current from the Current Consulting Group.
Well, thank you very much, Greta, and welcome everyone to today's webinar presentation, Current in 30. We've got a lot of ground to cover in today's presentation. And if you have questions, put them in the question and answer section there on the screen. We'll try to get to everyone that we can, but those that we can't, we will respond to later via email. Today, we're going to cover these basic three categories. Why you test determines when and how you'll test, the attributes of urine, oral fluid, and hair testing compared to one another, and then a brief discussion of state laws and federal regulations as they apply to these three different types or methods of testing. So again, a lot of ground to cover, but anything we don't get to today, we will respond to in an email. So just feel free to put your questions in there and we'll get to them. So let's start out with why you test determines when and how you'll test. Every year, the Current Consulting Group conducts a survey of the drug testing industry, which we release in the spring at the Endesa conference. We just did the 2026 survey of the industry just a month ago at the Endesa conference. And then in the fall, we do an employer drug testing survey. And what you're seeing on the screen here are the results from our 2025 employer survey. We asked the question, why establish and maintain a drug testing program? So this was a question posed to employers. And you can see right in the middle, that longer horizontal orange bar, 78% said to promote a safe workplace, the number one response, 78%. In other words, the number one reason why most employers conduct drug testing is to promote safety in the workplace. Now, number two at 61% was to comply with the DOT requirements. We know that DOT represents about 15 to 20% of all drug tests, but among the people who participated in our survey, a large percentage, 61%, said they drug test to comply with the DOT regulations. 50%, right there sort of in the middle in that blue bar, said it was to minimize legal risks. And if you go down to the bottom, that gray bar, 44%, said it was to hire the best possible job candidates. So to review, three of the most commonly cited reasons are: one, to maintain a safe work environment; two, to comply with government regulations; and three, to hire the best possible job candidates. So let's review just briefly the three primary drug testing methods, okay? You have urine, hair, and oral fluid. Now with urine, you have both lab-based and point of collection, POCT, sometimes referred to as rapid or instant result testing. To the right, you have lab-based oral fluid testing, as well as point of collection or rapid result oral fluid testing. And right there in the middle, you have hair testing, which is typically a lab-based test. So you've got urine, hair, and oral fluid testing. Now, in our survey, we asked employers, when does your company conduct drug testing? And right there in the middle, that long horizontal blue bar, 94% said pre-employment testing. That's what we would expect, that most employers screen job applicants, okay? Just below it a little bit in the gray bar, 84% said reasonable suspicion, and then above it, a gray bar, 80% said post-accident. And then just below pre-employment, that orange bar, 78% said random testing. So pre-employment, reasonable suspicion, post-accident, and random testing are the four most common reasons or situations that trigger a drug test. Okay, there are others like follow-up, periodic, return to duty, pre-access. I'll talk about pre-access in a minute. But the four primary reasons or situations in which a drug test occurs is pre-employment, post-accident, random, and reasonable suspicion. So let's look at the why, the when, and the how as it relates to certain situations. So if your objective is to deter workplace drug use, then you're going to want to do random drug testing. It's proven to be the most effective deterrent to drug use during the workday. Okay, people don't know when the test is going to occur, therefore it's random. Now, how do you want to test any one of those? Hair, oral fluid, or urine would work, but probably urine and hair are the most effective in this situation because of the longer window of detection with both of those testing methods. And I've got some slides coming up to talk in detail about the window of detection. Could be lab-based, could be point of collection, but probably urine and hair are ideal for random testing. Okay, let's look at another one. Why? To maintain safety in the workplace. Now, you might think a post-accident test would do that, but keep in mind that the very nature of a post-accident test is it occurs after the accident has occurred. So when in this situation, I'm going to recommend reasonable suspicion. Could be random, could be other things like pre-employment testing, but we're going to go with existing employees. We're going to say reasonable suspicion when somebody is suspected of being under the influence while at work. And which drug testing method matches best with that? Oral fluid, in my opinion. Maybe even point of collection oral fluid, because you can conduct the test right there in the workplace and have a result immediately so you know what you're dealing with. Let's look at one more. Excuse me. Why? To hire the best job candidate, right? So the best way is to screen that individual with a pre-employment drug test. Which testing method aligns best with that objective? Probably oral fluid testing. Could be urine or hair as well. And I'm going to talk about what I mean by lifestyle detection versus with oral fluid and a point of collection oral fluid, specifically being able to make same-day hiring decisions. But you've got a lot of flexibility, right? You've got lab-based oral fluid, lab-based urine, lab-based hair, as well as point of collection urine and oral fluid. A lot of options, a lot of possibilities there, okay? But the idea is that you're going to want to match the attributes of a testing method with the objective that you have. What is going to give you the best opportunity to achieve that objective, the why? And then when will the test occur? Pre-employment, post-hire, and if it's post-hire, reasonable suspicion, post-accident, or random. And then how? You know, oral fluid, urine, hair, lab-based, or point of collection. So let's compare the three different testing methods, okay? Oops, I went a little bit too far. Let's compare the attributes of each of the three testing methods. Now, you're going to get the link to the recording of this, so don't try to take too many notes here because there's a lot of information on the screen. But in this chart, we look at along the left-hand column, the attributes, right? Is it lab-based or point of collection or both? Is it scientifically sound? Meaning, is it accurate? Is it considered accurate scientifically? What's the window of detection? What's the ability to detect recent drug use? Can it detect marijuana? Is it legal? What's the legal status on a state-by-state basis? And what about federal regulations? Do they exist for that testing method? So let's go through a few of them. We won't go through everything on this chart, but let's go up at the top and answer the question, lab-based or point of collection. With urine, as I mentioned before, it's both. There are lab-based urine, of course, as well as point of collection or rapid result urine devices. With oral fluid, same thing, lab-based or point of collection. With hair, it's primarily a lab-based test, although one company has come out with a rapid hair test, which is gaining some traction in the criminal justice market. Okay, maybe not yet for workplace, but it could eventually. Is it scientifically sound? Is it accurate? Urine, oral fluid, and hair testing have all proven to be accurate at detecting the drugs that we test for. Now, window of detection is very important. So let's take a minute to go over that row there. With urine, there's a lag time of about 6 to 7 hours after somebody uses a drug before the metabolite of that drug becomes detectable in a urine sample. And then once it becomes detectable, it remains detectable at the cutoff levels that we use for about 3 to 7 days, depending on a lot of factors. Is the drug detectable beyond 7 days? Absolutely. But at the cutoff levels that we're using, we're usually going to be somewhere in that 3 to 7 day range. Now with oral fluid, we're detecting, look at the row just below it, the ability to detect recent use. And the one below that, detecting marijuana parent THC. So there's a difference between urine and oral fluid in that with urine, you're detecting the metabolite of the drug. And that's why it takes about 6 to 7 hours before the metabolite of cannabis, let's say, becomes detectable in a urine sample. However, with oral fluid, you're detecting the parent drug or the drug itself. So with marijuana, for example, it becomes detectable in an oral fluid sample almost immediately after use, let's say within 15 minutes. And it remains detectable for somewhere in the 24 to 36 hour range, though it can be less than that, depending on whether we're talking about a lab-based oral fluid test or a rapid oral fluid test, what cutoff levels you're using, etc., and which drug you're testing for. Marijuana would be probably a shorter overall window of detection, but you're going to have that ability to detect recent use. And then by comparison, with hair, there's a lag time of about 7 to 10 days before a drug becomes detectable in a hair sample, but it remains detectable for up to 3 months, for about 90 days. Now, if we're talking about a chronic user, then that lag time of 7 to 10 days may not be significant because they're constantly using drugs and the drug is detectable in their hair continuously because they're using every day. Okay, let's go down to the bottom though, because I'm going to talk about state laws in more detail later. There are federal regulations for urine and lab-based oral fluid testing. So under the federal regulations, there are guidelines for, let's call them regulations really, for urine, of course, right? Lab-based urine, as well as lab-based oral fluid testing, but not point of collection urine or point of collection oral fluid. There have been proposed regulations for hair testing. They're not there yet, but with both urine and oral fluid testing, there are federal regulations available. Now, we won't spend time on this slide because this kind of goes into a little bit of what I was talking about with the window of detection and being able to detect the drug immediately after use or waiting for the metabolite to become detectable. But I think you'll find this one interesting to spend a little bit of time on when you have a little bit of an opportunity to review today's recording. I do want to talk about another result from our survey. So the Current Consulting Group, as I mentioned, does a survey of the industry, and we do a survey of employers. This is from the employer survey in 2025. What drug testing methods do you, your company, currently use in your workplace program? You can see that long or horizontal orange bar, 88% said lab-based urine testing. That looks pretty impressive, but actually it's down from about 90% the year before and probably 100% 15, 20 years ago, right? But other testing technologies like lab-based oral fluid and rapid oral fluid, as well as hair testing, have all started to encroach in that market share a little bit with lab-based urine testing. Above that bar, you can see that instant urine testing, pretty solid at 46%. And then going down to hair testing at 31%, again, pretty solid given that it's, sort of got a niche market. Oral fluid at 50% when you combine instant and lab-based oral fluid testing is very impressive because maybe 10 years ago, if we'd asked this question this way, the percentage would have been maybe 10 to 15%. But now about 50% of employers are saying they use some form of oral fluid testing. Now, when we ask the question, which testing methods do you plan to implement in the next year? 67% said they're going to stand pat right where they are. They're not going to add anything. They're not going to change what they're doing, whether it was urine, oral fluid, or hair already, right? But the drug testing methods that are most likely to be added are both lab-based oral fluid and instant oral fluid testing, which combined come out to 31%. So we're definitely seeing a trend toward using oral fluid testing, especially after DOT came out with its final regulations for oral fluid testing, which are pending some final approvals and certain conditions being met. But once DOT endorsed oral fluid testing, lab-based oral fluid testing, then we started to see a pretty significant movement toward oral fluid testing, probably even among employers that are not covered under the DOT regulations. They just looked at the DOT regulations as sort of a gold standard and said, hey, if DOT approves it, I'm comfortable with it. And so we're starting to see that movement. And in the next year, about 31% say they're going to add some form of oral fluid testing to their program. Now, every year, Quest Diagnostics comes out with a report based on all the drug tests that they conduct, which is millions every year. And they share the positivity rates for each of the testing methods, urine, oral fluid, and hair, and for each of the drugs that they test those methods, those specimens for. So I'm not going to go through all of this, right? But I just want to point out the overall positivity rate for urine and oral fluid testing are almost identical at 5.6% versus 5.4%. Much higher with hair testing, which I'm assuming is a much smaller volume compared to urine and oral fluid testing. But you've got that longer window of detection, which may be what you're looking for in certain testing situations like pre-employment screening of safety-sensitive positions. Now go down about to the middle of the chart where you see marijuana. You can see that with urine, it was 4.5%. With oral fluid, it was higher at 10.4%. Part of that's because you've got the ability with oral fluid testing to detect use within minutes after somebody has smoked a joint. So say somebody goes out to their car at lunchtime, they smoke a couple of joints, they come back in, they smell of marijuana, they're acting a little bit strange, it triggers a reasonable suspicion test. With oral fluid testing, they're going to most likely test positive for that very recent marijuana use. Excuse me. Whereas with urine, you're going to have that lag time that I talked about of 6 to 7 hours. So you're going to get fewer positives on the front end of the window of detection, more on the back end. But look at hair at 13.6%. That's because you've got that long 90-day window of detection. So if it's a chronic marijuana user, it will show up in their hair, probably at any point. But oral fluid testing is probably more ideally suited for that situation like a post-accident or reasonable suspicion test where you need to know right now and you need to be able to do the collection as easily as possible. So let's look at each of the testing methods by the circumstances, okay? We talked a little bit about this with the 3 examples I used at the beginning, but let's look at each one of them separately. So what is urine testing best suited for? Well, you could use urine testing for any of these situations, pre-employment and any of these post-hire testing circumstances. But I would say that it's ideal for pre-employment where you're perhaps looking for some lifestyle drug use detection versus with oral fluid where you're looking at very recent drug use. Probably with post-accident, more than reasonable suspicion. That's why I put it in bold. Random testing, definitely. Follow-up testing is a kind of a random testing method, right? Because you're following up with somebody who's maybe going through a treatment program. Maybe they're under the supervision of the substance abuse professional, a SAP, and they don't know when the test is necessarily going to occur, okay? And then you can see other markets for urine testing, definitely criminal justice and treatment, very popular for many, many years in those markets as well. Oral fluid testing, I'm going to say pre-employment works great if you're looking at doing same-day hiring. You want to hire the best possible person the day you meet them, the day they come in for their interview. Maybe it's at a job fair. You're going to do rapid oral fluid testing, and you're going to be able to know the result immediately. You're going to be able to make same-day job offers to the majority of the people that you test because you're going to have a result right away. And the oral fluid test itself was easy enough to be able to do that you could do it right there on site. It's ideal for post-accident and reasonable suspicion, where you need to know right now, did the person use recently? And I'm also going to add this as well, which I didn't put on the slide, which is that if you're in a marijuana-friendly state, a state that's legalized marijuana at the state level, and there's some restriction on taking adverse employment action against somebody who tests positive for marijuana, unless there's some other evidence or proof of impairment. And I'm not suggesting the drug test result proves impairment, but it more closely correlates with the possibility of impairment or being under the influence, because it detects drug use within minutes after somebody's used the drug. So ideal for post-accident reasonable suspicion, maybe not as much for random or follow-up testing, but return to duty when that person comes back to start their job again after completing treatment. You're going to do a return to duty test, might be good for that. Now, outside of the DOT regulations, of course, until the final approval or access gets granted. And then pre-access. Pre-access is in certain workplace situations where everybody who comes into a particular work site has to be tested before they can start the job. And so call it pre-access or fitness for duty in some cases, right? But everybody who shows up is going to be tested. A rapid result oral fluid test is ideal in that situation. You don't have to send the results or the sample to a lab. It's easy to collect the sample. You know within minutes if it's positive or negative. If it's positive, you're going to send it into the lab for confirmation. So that person may not be able to work that day. But if it's negative, which is going to be the case in most testing situations, right? Then you're going to be able to put that person, all of those people, to work right away, just as you were anticipating. Now with hair testing, it's really a long-term lifestyle drug use detection method. So it's ideal for pre-employment testing, especially in certain industries, reasonable suspicion and post-accident, maybe not as much. Ideal for random, ideal for follow-up testing, but not so much for pre-access, for example. You could use it in any of these testing situations, but ideal for pre-employment, random, and follow-up testing, and very popular in certain markets like insurance, probation and parole, and drug treatment. So now let's move on to state laws and federal regulations. So I'm going to go through these quickly because we're running out of time, and we promised to keep you to around 30 minutes. So with state laws and federal regulations, you're looking for anything that identifies which testing method you can use. And under the federal regulations, we're talking about lab-based urine and very soon lab-based oral fluid testing. Outside of the federal regulations, you're governed by state laws, and most states allow, all states allow lab-based urine testing, but most states also allow rapid urine testing. Oral fluid testing, lab-based in 49 out of 50 states. Rapid oral fluid testing usually allowed wherever rapid urine testing is allowed, but not always, so you got to check. And then hair testing, it has its own category. There are different kinds of laws. I'm not going to go through all of these, but just keep in mind that you're looking at mandatory and voluntary laws. So, and this one I'm going to give you an example of. Iowa has a mandatory law that applies to all employers in the state that do drug testing. Here where I live in Florida, we have a voluntary law that only applies to companies that participate in the state's voluntary workers' compensation premium reduction law. Outside of that voluntary law here in Florida, we don't have a mandatory law. So you need to know which kind of law you have in the states where you do business, and then, comply accordingly. So know the state laws that apply to you and what they say about impairment, especially if you're in a marijuana-friendly state. There's going to be specific language about impairment. Oral fluid testing, as I mentioned, has been approved by the federal government, but we're still waiting for final enactment so that covered employers can use it. Outside of the DOT regulations, you'd be governed by state laws. So is it legal to test for marijuana in marijuana legal states? The good news is yes, although there are restrictions that apply that make it very difficult in some states like New York. Almost not worth the trouble to try to find those few loopholes in the New York law that would allow for testing for marijuana. But in most states you can. You just want to be careful that you're not discriminating against legal users of marijuana in any way that would cause them to initiate some type of legal challenge to your drug testing program. That would apply to pre-employment as well as post-hire. Individuals may not use marijuana or be under its influence while at work, and that's true in every state, regardless of the legal status of marijuana, okay? Some states, however, do have laws in place that would make urine testing impossible to do. Let me give you an example. In California and Washington, laws were passed that would prohibit employers from taking any type of adverse employment action against, in California, job applicants and employees. In Washington, just job applicants, only applies to pre-employment testing, who fail a test because they tested positive for marijuana if the testing method that you're using is only capable of detecting the metabolite of cannabis, excuse me, and not the parent drug. That would preclude you from using urine testing, but still allow you to use oral fluid testing where you're detecting the parent drug. So we asked the question a couple of years ago, after these laws were changed, what percentage of your customers have been switching to oral fluid testing in California and Washington? You can see in the box to the left in 2024, 63% said that their clients are starting to switch to oral fluid testing. In 2025, when we asked the question, that percentage had dropped to 36%, which I take to mean that most of their clients who were going to switch had already started to switch. Okay, so in conclusion, you need to know why you're testing, because that's going to help you determine when to test and how to test. These are some of the reasons from our employer survey that I thought you would find interesting. If you look at how a company measures its return on investment from drug testing, very clear, these are the things that they're looking to accomplish, right? Reduction in accidents, reduce workers' comp claims, etc. Know why you're testing very clearly, because that will guide you toward what testing method you use, which employees and job applicants are going to be subject to testing, and when you'll conduct testing. When we asked the question, what benefits do you get from drug testing? 84% said improved safety in the workplace. So does drug testing work? Absolutely. Remember, that's the number one reason employers gave for conducting drug testing, and 84% said they believe it's working, that it is helping them achieve a safer workplace. What are the biggest challenges to performing tests? I just thought you'd find this interesting. 40% said getting test results in a timely manner, and 36% said arranging collections. That sort of gears us, or sort of takes us down the path toward rapid result testing, maybe rapid result oral fluid testing in particular, because it's so easy to do. And then a lot of employers just say that marijuana legalization is making it difficult for them to manage their drug testing program. So that's something you need to keep a close eye on. But remember, the number one reason why employers said they drug test is to promote a safe workplace. That's your number one objective. That will help you accurately identify the drug testing method that's best for you and your company, and will help you achieve that objective. So here at Current Consulting Group, we can help. We offer a lot of different services that may be of assistance to you, including policy development, online training courses, as well as in-person training courses. And we maintain the most comprehensive and up-to-date database of state drug testing laws called Current Compliance. So we can help you comply with these laws that apply to you, as well as help you put together a policy that identifies your objectives and identifies the drug testing method that's going to be best for you. So if you want more information, please reach out to us. We have another webinar coming up on June 22nd with Jackie Perrone. As Greta mentioned, we're here twice a month with Current and 30. If you're missing any past episodes, just go to our website at currentconsultinggroup.com and you'll find what you're looking for. So with that, Greta, let me turn it back over to you.
Oh, thank you, Bill. We have a lot of questions, but I think we have time just for one. Why are so many employers starting to consider oral fluid testing? Can you maybe mention advantages that it offers aside from those that you mentioned in this webinar?
Yeah, I think the big issue right now is one, the legalization of marijuana, which I think has spooked a lot of employers, but also the more recent controversy surrounding the current administration's efforts to reschedule marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, which will make it more accessible. And so I think a lot of employers are concerned about that. And so they're looking for a drug testing method that has a tighter window of detection, that's really going to be more focused on recent use and a correlation to impairment or under the influence at the moment. That's why I recommend oral fluid testing for post-accident and reasonable suspicion testing scenarios. And if you're in a state that's legalized recreational marijuana use or medical marijuana use, you're going to want to use a testing method with that tighter window of detection so that somebody can't claim that they used the drug a week ago or a month or two ago, which is what's going to happen with urine and hair testing.
Great. Thank you, Bill. And thank you to everyone joining us for today's edition of Current in 30. We hope that today's insights have helped you stay informed and confident in your workplace drug screening decisions. As a reminder, this presentation was recorded and you will receive instructions in a few days informing you how to access the recording. Additionally, this presentation qualified for half of a professional development credit from SHRM and HRCI for those who attended today's presentation in its entirety. If you have met that requirement, you will be emailed those activity IDs. Remember, we'll be back every second and fourth Monday of 2026 with things you need to know to stay current in this industry. Be sure to follow the Current Consulting Group and check your inbox for upcoming session details. Until next time, stay current and have a great day.